Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, said, and I quote, "Middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we are on the menu." Now, for those of you who were our guests during the last Probus Pleion Spotlight On with Dr. Charles Dallara, the former president of Partners Group, USA, you understand how important geopolitics really are. And yet again, today, we try to shed light on the fast-shifting landscape of our world. What are your important questions when you look at geopolitics and the world? What insights could we share with you today? Please use the chat function so that you can ask your questions from the very start of our discussion. This will help us to organize and answer your questions better. Thank you. We are delighted to have two exceptional people for you today, and it's with great pleasure that we present Joseph Fung and Emmanuel Hui. Good afternoon, Joseph and Emmanuel. Before we start, bear with me. I need to cover a few technical points. Please give me a moment. In order to remain compliant, we'll not be able to give securities advice during this call. Our content is not to be seen as investment or other advice. Our two guests share their own views and opinions. My colleagues and I will be happy to assist and answer your personal questions and recommend a strategy of investment that fits your personal situation on a bilateral manner. We want to make sure that our recommendations are meeting your expectations and are within your risk tolerance and help you to achieve your goal and ambitions. Besides this, we will assure compliance with both the regulations in your home country as well as our own local rules. Now I have two CVs in front of me, and I was just saying to my guests, it is really amazing how much the two of you have achieved already. I'll try to paraphrase a little bit, and at the same time, I hope I catch the most important points. So we'll start with Emmanuel. Emmanuel, you're a biomedical entrepreneur and investor with a track record spanning several clinical care, scientific innovation, venture capital. You are the founder of Muchin Medi. You listed that on the Korean Stock Exchange. I mean, bringing up your own biotech tech company and listing it seems amazing. After listing, you returned to Hong Kong. You were part of Sagamore Investments, managed a portfolio of 2,000 companies in China private equity. And in 2021, you founded Tiger Jade Pebble Accelerator. Pebble, as a company that is dedicated to, number one, incubating and investing in the Hong Kong biotech startup sphere. Secondly, bringing global innovation into China. And thirdly, bringing Chinese innovations through Hong Kong to the world. So a classic bridge function of bringing the world to Asia and Asia to the world. Pebble is backed by Tiger Jade and Tiger Med, China's largest clinical CRO, and other major institutions such as Morningside and Nanfeng. Emmanuel has a strong ties also to academia here in Hong Kong, with particularly the Chinese university, where you're part of the advisory board or investment committee of the Innovation Fund, and you're also teaching at the business school. Additionally, you serve on several government boards, including the Hong Kong Hospital Authority's Ethics Board and the Hong Kong Life Sciences Society. Of course, you work very closely together with Saltagen Ventures as a domain partner with this very deep experience in science, academia, both in the private and public sectors of Hong Kong. Amazing. Welcome to the call, and we're very privileged to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Joseph, as the managing partner of Saltagen Ventures, a regional venture cap fund house who's specializing in life science, in agricultural technology, clean tech, and artificial intelligence. You're focusing on deep technology and groundbreaking solutions to tackle the world's pressing challenges. So I see you're actively collaborating with both public and private institutions in Canada, here in Asia as well, to support that technology startup scene and scale them globally. In addition to your role as Saltagen, you're the founder and managing director of Fairchild Canadian Academy, which is an early learning school, basically play-based, inquiry-based, very, very interesting, and backed there by very renowned institutions like the Simon Fraser University, like the University of British Columbia, the Chinese University, and the Education University here in Hong Kong. That's simply amazing. I love that. And also at the same time, you have served at the Canada member of the APEC Business Advisory Council, where you fulfilled key roles over the past 5 years. You've acted as a conduit between Canadian business community and the broad private sector in APEC, and this particularly for food security, sustainability, and innovation technology. Very, very interesting. Now, currently, you're governor at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce here in Hong Kong. You have served as advisory board member of the Creative Destruction Labs Global, the faculty board member of the University of British Columbia, the management board of the VersiTech at the University of Hong Kong, and as a board of director of the Hong Kong Medical and Health Devices Industry Association. It goes on and on. Joseph, I don't know how you do it. Prior to your today's world, you were leading research teams at both Morgan Stanley and prior to that, Citigroup Alternative Investments on the buy side. And you've played a pivotal role at the global expansion of PCCW Media Hong Kong and spearheading their overseas business development. Joseph, we're very privileged to have you, and I'm just in awe when I see what you've achieved. Now, without further ado, let me make a big step back. Let's hand me the floor to you and tell us a little bit where you see the world and what you're discussing when you meet Mr. Carney privately.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. I got to say, I love how Mark Staudeman made a comment and quoted Mark Carney. So we have a lot of good Marks here, just already starting. And I just wish that I should have named myself Mark, or my parents did in that way. So thank you everyone for joining us here today. It is a pleasure to be a part of this discussion and to see such a strong interest from investors, business leaders who are focused in the future of the global economy. I do know that quite a lot of people are from various parts of the world, including Asia and Europe. So in this context is that we're covering Canada and also middle powers within the APEC region. So that's actually a pretty broad spectrum. I think that we only have around 1 hour. That's not enough, but this is just a teaser, right? So this session on trade and innovation amongst middle powers come at a particularly important moment. We see this in the news every single day, that the world as we know it is going through tremendous change. The assumptions that have guided international trade, investment, and economic cooperation for decades are being challenged. Supply chains are evolving, technology is scaling rapidly, and globally, governments and businesses alike are adopting different methodologies for a more complex and uncertain multipolar world. So against this backdrop, middle powers such as Canada have an increasingly important role to play. Our ability to build trusted partnerships, foster innovation, and create stable investment environments will help shape the next phase of global growth. Today's discussion is particularly timely because it not only focuses on challenges, but also on the opportunities to reshape and rebuild institutions and frameworks that align with the changing world. As investors and business leaders, understanding how governments, markets, and institutions are responding to these shifts will be critical to identifying where capital can create value and where new partnerships can emerge. So this is an era where staying in your lane is gone, and now context is everything. Next slide, please. Today, I want to begin this short presentation with a few highlights from the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in his speech to the World Economic Forum earlier this year. Many of you may have heard the speech, but as a Canadian, I found this to be truly candid and refreshing, especially coming from any political leader. So If you have not heard his speech, I strongly encourage you to take a few minutes of your day to watch and read his remarks. But there are a few key points I would like to raise that illustrate the current state of the world. So first is the end of a rules-based international order. Carney begins by saying that there is a rupture in the world order and the end of a nice story and the beginning of a brutal reality where geopolitics among great powers is not subject to constraints. The word rupture is carefully chosen here, and I want you to highlight that. Second is the threat to existing multilateral institutions, heavily relied upon before, and especially by middle powers. In this response, many countries are reaching the same conclusion that they must develop greater strategic autonomy. Because if you can produce all that you can need at home, you're safer from external pressures and shocks. But now conversely, there is some nuance, and nuance is very important in this global stage right now. Mark Carney warns that a world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And this is very true. The world now is more interconnected than ever before. So the challenge is not to retreat from globalization, but to build a more resilient form of economic integration that can withstand the growing uncertainties. This is where Canada sees an important role for middle powers. Rather than relying on single global frameworks, Canada is pursuing what is described as a variable geometry, building different coalitions around different issues based on shared interests, values, and outcomes. Whether the issue is trade, critical minerals, energy security, infrastructure investment, or technological innovation, there is significant opportunity for like-minded partners to work together to strengthen resilience while continuing to create economic growth. And the final message that middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu is particularly salient for investors. In this increasingly fragmented world, countries and partnerships that can provide stability, trust, and policy predictability are the ones that will attract the most capital. Next slide, please. So Canada's dilemma, right? Not everything is sorted. We have to recognize is that we must embrace the unknown and to acknowledge our weaknesses. And that's why the word dilemma is very important, is to be honest with ourselves that we are in a pickle. So what can other middle powers learn from Canada's shifting foreign policy? Canada's dilemma is one of many economies that face the same issue today. By having a shared long history and also a 9,000-kilometer border with our neighbors down south, Canada faces the very real challenge of preserving constructive ties with the United States while building economic resilience and strategic agency. Historically, Canada has maintained one of the most geographically concentrated export bases in the world, leaving it vulnerable to the increasingly unpredictable trade policies by the US. You can see that in 2025, Canadian exports to the US accounted for almost 3/4 of all exports, while imports were just below half. And this is after accounting for significant reductions in trade. Canada's vulnerabilities and risks were underscored last year by the escalating trade hostilities when the US abruptly imposed tariffs on Canadian imports, including steel, aluminum, and lumber. To this, Canada responded with a mix of strategic retaliation, economic protection, and domestic industry support. Canadians across the country continue to feel the weight of the trade war in their day-to-day lives. And you can see this when you go buy coffee in Canada, with many cafes now calling traditional Americano as Canadiano instead. I mean, that's a very, very small change, but culturally, it is a big change. Nowadays, provinces like British Columbia and Ontario, you can rarely find American wine and whiskey, despite Canada having been the largest buyer in previous years. And so that particularly hurts me. I love my California wines and my Tennessee whiskey, but I'm quitting that right now too. So I'm just a part of that play, but everyone is also participating in that. So between 2024 and 2025, wine exports from US dropped by $343 million, representing a 77% year-over-year decrease. But the reality is that businesses and consumers are not the ones suffering greatly from this trade war, not just in Canada, but also in the United States too. And as Canada explores options to build greater economic resilience, they are looking towards strengthening its trade relations especially with trustworthy long-term partners across Europe and dynamically fast-growing economies in Asia. Next slide, please. So this is where existing institutions have this opportunity to adapt and respond to the mounting challenges of a more unpredictable world. So here I am, I'm sure you might be asking, why am I speaking to you from Hong Kong about Canada to Europeans? That's a really funny question, right? Because it's about that interconnectedness. And I need to be candid, is that there needs to be an understanding between the lines of trade, between economies, not just only about domain-specific knowledge. So over the past 5 years, I have had the privilege of working very closely with my government as the Canadian member of the APEC Business Advisory Council of ABAC, which is the official private sector arm of APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. So in a way, in a nutshell, is that I have been and I am a direct appointee by both Prime Minister Mark Carney and by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And in every economy or country, there's only up to 3 members. It's a small group of around 50 people who have direct access to their state leader. So as an example, as part of this group, there's the chair and the heads of LG, Sinochem, Daiwa Bank, and including individuals that have been as part of ABAC, including from the US, Mark Zuckerberg, and also on the other end, Oleg Deripaska from Russia and the Siloviki as well, too. So we sit with also the heads of state in a one-on-one sessions to drive economic, trade, and policy key priorities by our own economies as well. So now let's rewind back a little bit. For those that are not familiar with APEC, it is one of the oldest economic forums in the Asia Pacific, with core purpose of championing free and open trade and accelerating regional economic integration. With APEC's mandate focusing on economic growth rather than politics, it is a forum that brings to the table government leaders and bureaucrats from economies which are typically at odds. And that's a reality, is that APEC is a very dynamic region. So it includes the US, Russia, China, Hong Kong, and Chinese Taipei, which are all able to participate as equal members. So that's why we use the word economy rather than country or state in this way. This is because at APEC, we participate as economies. And so this format allows for greater economic cooperation and candid discussions between various economies despite ongoing political tensions. So as mentioned earlier, ABAC is composed of 3 business leaders from each economy who are directly appointed by their respective prime ministers or presidents. Each year, ABAC members meet 4 times and produce recommendations, which are directly presented to ministers that are relevant at the APEC ministerial meetings. ABAC's work then culminates in a final report to leaders during the annual APEC Economic Leaders Week, where APAC business leaders meet with the government heads of state with all 21 economies. Through my work at ABAC and my interactions with leaders from the region, it is unanimous that we need to seek cooperation on the political level in order to pursue economic growth and resilience. Businesses are ready to cooperate amid the geopolitical tensions, and we continue to call upon governments to do also the same. While this may be difficult, given the ongoing tensions between large powers, it is worthwhile, especially for middle powers, to come together to build different coalitions around different priorities to begin reshaping the international order. Next slide, please. So this brings me back to Carney's approach on variable geometry. In Canada, we are focusing on what we control by building our strength at home and diversifying our partnerships abroad. Since taking office in 2025, Mark Carney has put significant emphasis on building up Canada's own strength. The agenda actively reflects a recognition that economic security, national security, and investment competitiveness are becoming increasingly interconnected. One of the most significant initiatives has been the establishment of the Major Projects Office, designed to accelerate the approval and delivery of nation-building infrastructure projects. The objective is to reduce regulatory complexity, improve coordination, and bring critical investments to market more quickly. We're talking about trillions of dollars of capital in this. And this is quite, I would say, new for Canada that has been rather stingy over decades in how we spend. And people forget oftentimes that Canada is the fourth largest economy by GDP in APEC, just behind US, China, and Japan, and the ninth largest economy in the world. So we have a lot to spend, actually. So for investors, this is an important signal. Canada's challenge has often been on execution rather than opportunity. Faster project timelines and greater regulatory certainty can help unlock private capital and improve Canada's competitiveness. The government also launched Canada's first defense industrial strategy and created Defense Industrial Agency. Combined with an increased defense spending, these initiatives are intended to strengthen domestic industry capacity, drive innovation, and position Canada as a more active contributor to allied security and defense supply chains. In addition to Canada's first sovereign wealth fund, which represents the strategic shift towards mobilizing capital for long-term national priorities. The goal is to leverage on Canada's economic strengths and generate sustainable returns while supporting investments that enhance productivity and competitiveness. So taken together, these actions reflect a broader strategy of making Canada more investable, more productive, and more resilient in a world where capital is increasingly seeking stability, trusted institutions, and predictable policy environments. Canada is positioning itself to adapt to the changing global economy, while also competing for investment, talent, and innovation that will shape the next generation of growth. Next slide, please. So this feeds to the second pillar of diversifying its international partnerships. In a world where geopolitical risk is increasingly influencing trade and investment decisions, Canada is pursuing a broader network of trusted economic and strategic relationships. In Europe, Canada and the EU recently signed a landmark security and defense partnership. This agreement reflects a growing recognition that economic resilience and security are closely linked. For investors, deeper Canada-EU cooperation expands access to markets, strengthens policy alignment, and reinforces confidence in two of the world's most stable economic regions. Canada is also pursuing a strategic reset in its relationship with China. While differences do remain, both countries recognize the importance of maintaining economic engagement where mutual interests do align. Recent progress on reducing trade barriers, including tariffs affecting Canadian canola oil and seafood exports and Chinese EV vehicles, demonstrates a pragmatic approach focused on restoring commercial opportunities while managing broader strategic considerations. Canada also has been enhancing engagement with Southeast Asia, which is one of the world's fastest growing economic regions and home to a rapidly expanding middle class. Increasing urbanization, and significant infrastructure and technology investment opportunities. Canada is actively negotiating a free trade agreement with ASEAN and has already concluded a Canada-Indonesia Economic Partnership Agreement framework. So these efforts are designed to strengthen market access and facilitate investment flows and deepen commercial ties across one of the most dynamic regions in the global economy. So looking ahead, Canada has offered to host APEC in 2029, which also provides a significant platform to strengthen economic partnerships across the Asia-Pacific region. So these initiatives reflect a clear strategy: diversify markets, strengthen trusted partnerships, and position Canada as a reliable and connected economy in an increasingly fragmented world. Next slide, please. Now, I'm using the word Canada. I'm sure that, people came in understanding is that they want to come learn about Canada. And I've been trying to position it in such a way that it gives, again, a broader context. A lot of people may have had relationships with Canada more on a study side or maybe even on a real estate side. But this is actually very important, is that there's a huge pivot. And this pivot is about opportunities in investment. And those that haven't had this opportunity, this talk today, this webinar today, gives a little bit of an understanding beyond the typical tropes of investment and what Canada provides beyond our maple syrup and beyond our natural resources. So Canada's strong fiscal position gives it a flexibility and credibility to respond to global economic and geopolitical challenges while continuing to invest in the long-term growth. We maintain the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the entire G7, reinforcing its reputation as a stable and reliable partner for investment, innovation, and international cooperation. For businesses, diversification is no longer simply a risk management strategy. It is becoming a growth strategy. Canada's dual approach of building a stronger domestic system and expanding partnerships abroad is creating new pathways for capital, trade, and innovation. Again, I'm emphasizing the word about stability and safety. This is something, again, that's a geopolitical overlay a lot of investors took for granted during the last 30 to 50 years. And this is something that must be integrated in terms of strategic asset allocation. Next slide, please. Like many businesses, our company, Saltagen Ventures, has long been on the front lines of bridging partnerships globally. We have built unique relationships in two major parts of the world, North America and Asia, with many of our portfolio companies operating in both regions. Nowadays, the primary bottleneck in global innovation has increasingly shifted from generating breakthrough technologies to successfully translating them into viable markets. Many innovations fail to reach markets not because of weak science, but due to enhanced challenges in navigating regulatory diversity, market demand, and ecosystem readiness across various economies. In high innovation sectors like precision medicine, agtech, and nanotechnologies, local partnerships and regulatory pathways are decisive in determining whether a technology can successfully translate across regions. And we actively act as a bridge that reduces the structural challenges of cross-regional innovation, given our diverse and strategic networks, which we leverage to accelerate innovation, scale operations, and provide startups with a broader range of resources. I would like to highlight some of our companies that are succeeding in translating their innovative strategies globally. Next slide, please. First is Acoustics, a company that is developing a hardware-agnostic, AI-powered software platform designed to turn existing, inexpensive ultrasound devices into powerful and efficient point-of-care tools for liver disease and other diseases with high unmet clinical needs. So take Acoustics, a compelling example of Canadian-born innovation rooted deeply in Canada's world-class AI and medical research ecosystems. Acoustics addresses a massive global health crisis, which is liver disease, by turning inexpensive and widely available hardware into these type of powerful tools. So this is precision medicine at its most democratic form. Instead of requiring multi-million-dollar imaging suites, they're putting high-end diagnostics directly into the hands of point-of-care clinicians around the world. And as a middle power, Canada excels at pioneering this kind of high-impact, deep science. But the true challenge is scaling it beyond our borders. And this is exactly where Saltagen Ventures' role comes in. We help Acoustics navigate the complexity of regulatory landscapes and varying market readiness between North America and Asia, ensuring that this game-changing Canadian technology can successfully translate and reach the millions of patients who need it the most. And I'll just quickly pass it to Emmanuel, who can delve a little bit deeper into this.
Yeah, thank you. I think thank you for introducing this opportunity to us at the accelerator level. But I think Saltagen and Pebble, we act as the accelerator that builds opportunities that then Saltagen can take on the next round for, and vice versa. We co-invest together in many ways. And so Acoustics is a project where we see a very clear Asian angle, because Asia and China specifically is where hepatitis is the largest. It's where fatty liver is an increasing problem. And liver cancer is also one of the top killers in this part of the world. And so it became a very natural progression where we see this great technology where it's doing something novel, where everybody else is looking at ultrasound images. Acoustics is looking at the actual acoustic signal coming from the hardware itself. So we're processing sound and not the images that are produced from the sound. So we're going directly to the source of the AI, of the data, and building an AI on top of that. And so with that, we realized that actually Hong Kong could be a wonderful place to land this technology, where we can first find a collaborator in Hong Kong to then recruit patients to be included for the FDA regulatory study. And because the Hong Kong sites are also recognized by the China NMPA, also the China FDA, Therefore, with this cohort inclusion, we should be able to have regulatory approval for US and China in a relatively short consecutive time frame, if not simultaneously. And so with Hong Kong as well, once a new innovation is adopted into the hospital authority system, it is able and allowed to be used and sold in the Greater Bay Area, which is this region in southern China of these 11 connected cities, which is about a population of 80 million people. And so without going to the national level, of approval from Beijing, we were able to actually begin selling these products and these innovative new projects locally, and then use the data that's generated from the Greater Bay Area, anchored through Hong Kong, as a way of generating real-world data for national level approval if additional regulatory hurdles need to be overcome. And so OnCu6 is a very good example where we are really able to while the US is being more difficult with CFIUS and with all these restrictions about technology leaving the US or entering, or even M&A with the Manus being restricted from being sold to Meta, we see Canada actually becoming a very wonderful partner and venue in which innovations from Hong Kong and from China can actually work together and expand markets for both. So this is a wonderful project that we're very excited for, with the FDA approval coming in a month from today. So we're really looking forward. Hopefully, fingers crossed. We'll see.
Yeah, Manuel, thank you for that. And thank you just also for teasing, how we collaborated and how we worked with each other over the years, and how we looked at it from pretty much an opportunity, value, and investment angle. So this was a really good way to kind of seg into later on, where our strength on strength in terms of collaboration works together in that way. Now, I also want to jump into the next slide, which is Xandercardian, which is a radar signal processing deep tech company based on microvibration pattern recognitions gathered from radar. So XK believes radar technology can greatly disrupt healthcare with autonomous, contact-free, continuous monitoring as a platform. And this is the future of predictive and preventative health, allowing clinicians to catch early warning signals without ever touching the patient or requiring wearable devices. From a middle power perspective, Xandercardian represents the ideal blend of higher level digital infrastructure and a practical global utility in this way. So our focus at Saltagen has been helping them cross that bridge into traditional workflows and utilizing them in existing regulatory environments, navigating distinct hospital data ecosystem and healthcare procurement frameworks. And so this is both happening in North America and Asia as we scale this impact worldwide. Again, I want to pass this a little bit more to Emmanuel to explain.
Yeah, and maybe to speak about this in more simpler terms, it's a radar device that's able to detect the heart rate and breath rate of patients without having to wear anything. And so from a compliance angle, it's much more better than, let's say, an Oura Ring or a Whoop or some other wearable that a patient would have in the bedside, because you take those off. And when you take those off, you're not able to have continuous data. And if you want reimbursement from the US, insurance system, you need to have continuous wear for 14 days in order for it to be recognized and reimbursable. So this actually, this technology speaks personally to me, because before I became an entrepreneur and then subsequently an investor, back when I was in college, I was working on the ambulance. I was a medic. I was in the emergency room. And and some nights I would have to, every 3 hours, go check on every patient to check on the pulse, check on the breathing, check on the condition. And it was grueling and unnecessary work, and well, very necessary, because you never know when a patient will deteriorate. Critically necessary.
Yes.
But it was just so demanding and taxing on the entire nursing staff, and me included. And so with this, we're able to have an automated self-reporting system that's every 4 minutes taking a reading, and it's continuous, and you're able to train an AI to then do predictive diagnostics to look at the patient's declining or improving condition over time. And so to me, this was a very personally important project. And then also bringing it to Hong Kong. We then engaged the hospital authority here, and they were quite excited. So now we have a couple pilot sites that are at Yanzai Hospital here in Hong Kong, and we're actually, it's been on. We're quite excited to see how this can improve the workflows and minimize the tasks, the onerous tasks for the nurses. But also we also put one of these in the prisons in Hong Kong, because it's also important that we have a observation of the prisoner condition. And typically before, you would have to have a prison guard to come knock on the door and maybe go in. It's a risk. It's a risk to the prison guard and to the prisoner too. So actually, we put one in the room. We tell them it's a Wi-Fi router, but really it's a heart rate monitor. They don't want to mess with the Wi-Fi because everybody wants internet. But truthfully, it is a heart rate monitor and a sort of a way to monitor the prisoner condition. Because if anything happens to the prisoner, the government is held liable. Then the government has to pay reparations to the family, and so there is a huge and clear economic benefit. And so we've had a very successful case of a patient who, a prisoner who was having some physical complications that was rescued because of our device that was in his cell. So we were very excited to really see how this platform that we've built here in Hong Kong can work and build bridges with middle powers and very practical and hands-on use cases.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. And just to give you an indication of the cost of liability is that this was also implemented in the United States with a very high prison population per capita. And liability of a prison, especially a private prison that's being run, in which a prisoner has died due to health complications, can go up to $5 million per prisoner. And so, there is ascribed value, and not just that, but lives being saved on that. And so people can see is that how do you actually develop that, across the ocean with very, very, very different political frameworks, very different regulatory frameworks, and still benefiting from the ecosystem. That's something that we navigate through quite well. Now, next slide. So in this new reality where global trading order is being redrawn, how can we as actors for middle power economies work together to reimagine the frameworks that govern innovation and trade? While I have provided some of the Canadian context, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from others, especially covering in terms of the rest of the world. I mean, we covered, I think in the last 20-something, less than 30 minutes, 2/3 of the world economy. So I think, hopefully that we can jump to the other part and cover the rest of the world in the remainder 30 minutes, and we got everything down pat, right? So, your thoughts will heavily contribute to this, changing ecosystem in the next decade. So thank you very much, Mark.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you, Emmanuel. Greatly interesting. So much. It's overwhelming in so many ways, but I'll pass the floor basically to you guests. Please do let us know your questions now. I have a few that we've already received. Use the chat function, and we'll basically dive into those and try to digest them and answer them. Now, one of the things that I just wrote down because you emphasized it, you mentioned rapture. Right? So rapture really is something that breaks and it's not going to go back together easily. But you look at the US and their might, economic might. If the US was to get back to sort of a more normalized framework of dealing with the rest of the world, how do you perceive the middle powers would act? Would the market forces not just be too strong for the yet fragile, early developed new ties not to rapture again, and everyone turning to the US again?
That's a very good question. It's highly, highly parallel to a lot of things that's already happening in the world, and whether it be at the US, from a Canadian perspective. Or, I know that there were some questions coming from Europe talking about Russia as an example, where, their legal risk, if they're looking forward in the next 5 years, there may be a chance that it can disappear overnight. But the problem is that trust in terms of the risk of that does not come back. It takes time to build. And as Canadians who have been the longest serving ally of the United States for over centuries of time, is how do we actually build up this trust? It takes time of of this rupture, as you say. So, I think a lot of things like in terms of tariffs, the punitive nature of the tariffs, the uncertainty on how it was imposed may be lifted, but people will think is that, on the next administrative change, even if things get better, it can come back. And people want to hedge against that. So, this is very similar to some questions like, if you were to look at it more specifically about Russia, is that there's asset freezes and forced exits and write-downs. That might not happen once a legal framework has actually been put in place that you're allowed to do that. But the thing is that investment committees still remember what happened and they won't be on them going forward. So it takes time. So right now is that this is a scramble. And this rupture will be in place no matter how much things might get better and how optimistic we are. We have to face that.
Understand.
And I also want to add in on about the Biden administration, right? We had Trump for a while, then we had Biden, and then we had Trump again.
Yeah.
And, when Biden came in, he actually didn't change too many of the things that Trump implemented. I mean, a lot of the blacklists against Wuxi, against SenseTime, against Hikvision, these Chinese companies remained. And so a lot of that damage is difficult to undo. And actually, what we see, the larger powers doing often is doubling down on these decisions, because in a way it's sort of too late or too difficult to unwind, and as a way to almost bully their way into consolidating their position, which theoretically, America first, right? That was supposed to strengthen US's position, and it's a matter of philosophy and I guess economic theory, whether or not you believe that those decisions and actually hindering your enemies, so to speak, would improve your own condition. And so with that as well, I think you will see a more and more bilateral partnerships globally. It's inevitable to see that, will we go back to the ex-boyfriend, so to speak?
Yes, absolutely.
I think, maybe, there will be a rebound in there definitely will be some recurrence of that relationship, but will it go back to the way it was before? I think the world is too far gone for that to be fully back in place. Yeah.
Right. Thank you both. Now we come to one question which clearly tells you that we have keen investors on the watching us, and well, the question is quite simple. If you have 100 million to invest, be that Canadian dollars or US dollars or maybe Swiss franc, how would you deploy over the next 24 months? Obviously not about this stock specifically, but more in a geopolitical regional way. Where would you invest? Why would you invest in terms of sectors and allocations?
Okay, so maybe I'll go first. Again, I'll be honest, is that it changes according to large, global geopolitical changes in that way. But I think I would look at and focus on new opportunities and to keep on delving deeper into opportunities within those fields that typical investors don't really look at enough. And again, it harkens to today's discussion about middle powers and the opportunities that lay there. So I would say that I would increase asset allocation depending on again, if you're based in Asia, if you're based in North America or Europe, it'll be actually highly different because your local market knowledge is also quite differentiated. But I'll look at, in a way, it's a broad spectrum classification of widely middle powers that you have not, that's not in your realm. And I would increase it, perhaps up to anywhere from from 0 to 15 to 20%. Because if you actually look at, asset allocation, typically it's very barbell or very far axis based in that way. But if you look at places, including, again, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, the largest growing market there, the understanding of, where that consumer growth is and the spending will be, and to bet on that in the next, 5 to 10 years, and to look at this type of volatility, risk-adjusted investment compared to global risk-adjusted investment, is that this is actually an opportunity that should be seriously considered. In addition to ASEAN, we talk about places such as safe and stable economies that are also middle powers. And by that, I mean Canada. Again, with heavily resource-driven economy that's seeking for greater diversification and also looking not just only on export opportunities, but the opportunity in terms of tech and research development that's already in place, that has a working relationship in existence, not just with the United States, but with other parts, including Asia and Europe. Canada is one of those perfect places that a lot of people who have not invested, this is the right time to take a look at. And of course, I would look at different sectors as well, right? In tech, it's really broad, but again, AI is always something that people talk about on a software angle. But again, you look at evaluations. If you have not been allocating before, my question is, do you want to allocate now at the current prices? That's up to you based on your risk-adjusted investment opportunities. But I would look at actually China. China is actually very interesting from that angle, right? About market re-entry. People have looked at China from an investor perspective, much more typically from the Alibaba, Tencent consumer tech in that way. But the future is more about industrial AI, robotics, energy technology, advanced manufacturing. That's where China will be exporting and also developing their global reach as a hegemony that has, I would say, found its footing. The whole thing about the Thucydides problem that was brought up when US visited China, and saying that a growing hegemony where hegemony that is shrinking and hegemony will be growing would be at odds with each other. But you focus on those domains that US does not have, that China has. And those were those domains that I just mentioned earlier: physical AI, infrastructure, and energy, and also life sciences, demographic coverage, the aging population, in terms of advanced biomedical research, that the baton has been passed from a typical hegemonic US FDA to a much more multipolar, multilateral NMPA as one of the key new drivers in this field. This is an area that's very, very interesting from asset allocation. For those that have not looked at it, they should look at it now than the typical rote type of investments that they've looked at before.
Understand. Thank you so much. In many ways, you have already answered also another question I received, at least to a very large degree. But let me turn the question that I had initially. So what are the areas you absolutely categorically rule out and you wouldn't touch?
Okay. Still me?
Okay. Sure. We'll
all right. First. Okay. I think there's a couple of things. I think Chinese residential real estate, there has been a correction. Sentiment is still very low. If you look at a capital flow of domestic investment or regional investment, even in the space, it has not really rebounded that much. If you look at China, is that there's other markets that are, again, when I mentioned the typical road type of investments that were available before, the opportunities, despite correction, is still not there. And the rebound will not be witnessing it, at least now. Again, again, I want to kind of look at it more from a European angle as well. There were questions that were being asked about, as there may be a ceasefire that may be involved and lifting of sanctions. People are maybe optimistic about, the Ukraine invasion by Russia. Is that again, is property speculation of a rebounding market of a war-torn place that great? Typically, I look at it from, again, because of my lens, having worked in both public and private sector, is that those rebounds, typically the risk is taken by institutional political entities such as the World Bank. That will be offsetting, or infrastructure investment banks that are there. And as a private sector investor, if you actually don't live there and breathe the culture there, there's still a lot of things that need to be corrected first. And we've seen that because of my work, having worked, covered Central Asia and Southeast Asia 20-something years ago. We've seen places like that where investors, if they time it too early, they get burned. So those are places, despite there may be optimism there, unless you really know what you're doing, I would not touch it from a wider standpoint.
Right. So you're talking about a potential reconstruction of Ukraine once a ceasefire really is reached. but you're also saying we're not really there, and it's for private individuals, even institutional investors, pension plans and what have you. It would be a very risky game that we should leave to the Credit für Wiederaufbau in German, or a World Bank type of investor. I understand that makes a lot of sense. When you look at the situation we have in the Middle East, how do you see the middle powers really reacting to that, and how do you see investors reacting to that? I mean, are you seeing that investors are complacent about potential inflation risks, or do you think maybe the expected higher bond yields are maybe out of proportion already?
I'll answer a portion of that first then. I'm going to look at it, with also my work with some of the pension funds over in the West, is that part of the drive, again, it's about asset allocation and understanding that they may be over allocated in specific markets, and therefore they're seeking new market access, historically, right? They reduce overall overextension of their capital in certain markets. Like if you invest too much, say, in software AI, and the value has grown because you started early, then you need to just dump that and go somewhere else in place. And that's similar to that of geopolitical risk as well, too. Now, Middle East is actually a very interesting place. A lot of people have seen, the attractiveness, especially from a family office perspective, and also even sovereign wealth fund perspective, in how they can invest in an area that has been stabilized from a top-down opportunity. And then you see the capital flow over decades coming in to follow where the money is, right? But then people forget about the fragility of specific markets. People forget that overnight, just because U.S. decides to attack Iran, Iran can retaliate to places that does not have such strong defense infrastructure built in. And people now kind of look back and say, okay, Hong Kong, because Hong Kong has also undergone and underwent some geopolitical problems around 5 to 6 years ago. People saw that, okay, this is something that I don't want to touch. Now, the thing is that if you drill down into the details of that, is Hong Kong, the right place? We look at investors that actually have, businesses and operations in Hong Kong. They're actually investing. They have invested even more over the last 2 to 3 years into Hong Kong, even before the Middle East issues and the destabilization over there. So the question is that, again, it comes from an asset allocation perspective. Do people actually understand, are they going with the flow, or doing more primary research to reach to these places? And again, there's no one-all be-all kind of answer to that. But if you're looking for a low-tax, high liquidity region that is has also quick access to high growth regions, people typically looked at, say, the UAE. Hong Kong is actually a pretty good and similar analogy, but without those geopolitical risks, in more of a direct day-to-day manner to the investors. And we saw quite a lot of investors seeing that over the last couple of months.
And on a day-to-day level, maybe I'll just give a small sort of personal anecdote type of angle to this.
Please.
To answer this is, I think it's fundamentally good for Hong Kong. The past couple of years, 2019, 2020, 2021, we've seen a lot of outflow, right? A lot of people leaving Hong Kong. But now you go back to all the country clubs or whatever, you see all the people who left, they're all coming back. The prices of each of these memberships is increasing incredibly so. And so the return, we see it on the ground, we feel it, and I think at the end of the day, people want to have reliable, consistent, predictable partners, and China is definitely one of them. And Hong Kong, the financial system, it's the courts and the legal system. It's still robust, The people have been concerned about the national security law, but really on the ground, it hasn't changed anything about how business is done. It hasn't affected the courts, the civil cases between corporations, and so there really has been little to no impact. And so people are beginning to see that firsthand as they return. And so I think that's just.
I also want to add one more part in kind of looking at Singapore, right? Because I'm looking at it also from a Canadian perspective. During 2018, 2019, there was a pivot away from Hong Kong and China. And a lot of Canadian investors that have been in that space, particularly pension funds, still have actually, funny enough, they've they've divested some parts, but they've kept at it. And there's been a lot of rhetoric in terms of developing deeper trade ties with Southeast Asia using Singapore as a base for that. Singapore, again, back then, the value was actually quite undervalued, and so everyone jumped on it. Now, if you look at the value now, do you want to go at it now? What a lot of people realize is that with the current value that you're paying, do you actually have market access to Thailand, to Indonesia, to Malaysia? Not directly, is that you also have to establish your own base there. Hong Kong has a double-edged sword in that Hong Kong is part of China, but then as a result is that you have direct access to the northbound market over there. So that's the thing, we actually look at it from, say, again, I'm going to use a lens of a Canadian, is that there's been a lot of push from the public sector to diversify out from the Asian hegemony of China and to look at Singapore as a focal point for that.
Yes.
But the reality is that if you actually look at a lot of Canadian private equity funds, mutual funds, and pension funds, is that their movement has not been actually that much, despite all that rhetoric.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think triggered also by the discussion here, one of the key questions for anyone in Hong Kong is always Hong Kong property, right? We all own, quite a bit of it. Do we buy more or do we stay put?
How many houses do you have?
So it's a question of the personal location. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, while I said, mainland China and itself, I would not touch on a real estate residential market.
Yeah.
Hong Kong is a different animal, and it has been a different animal for the past half century, right? Yes. This, due to several main reasons, limited space because of how mountainous and concentrated the development sites are, and at the same time, is that Hong Kong attracts a lot more foreign entities to structure there. Yep. So the high demand and is delinked with that of the Chinese market in terms of real estate. But again, it depends on a regional basis. I guess, because, maybe Emmanuel and I, we live in Hong Kong, there'll be certain specific areas, if you're looking at residential investment, do you want to invest in? Or the ones that are in oversupply and that attract typical investors that are from other side of the Greater Bay Area that now do not have the investment capital to specifically to buy flats in Hong Kong. That's also another question, right? Again, we can jump into the granularity of that, but I would look at it from a different angle than that of mainland China for property investment.
I'll mention it in terms of demand.
Yep.
I think we do see more demand returning to Hong Kong. I think there was definitely people left, quite a lot of people left.
Yep.
But, in the past couple of years, the number of science startups in the science park went from 600 to from 30 companies to 600 companies. Yep. Family offices in Hong Kong were 1,500 to over 3,000.
Yep. Yes.
And so the Invest Hong Kong and the Hong Kong government have been very aggressively sort of trying to bring people in various capacities. So I do think, there will be more demand for office space, for residential and nearby. I do think that it'll come. Are we at the bottom of the curve right now? I don't think we're at the bottom anymore. Are we at the top of it? Probably not yet. But it's again, if you were underexposed prior, maybe now is not the worst time to sort of but of course, if you find a good deal, it's always a good time.
Yeah, good deal is always a good deal.
Yeah,
absolutely. Apologies when I fiddle around with my devices here. I'm getting questions. Marco in Zurich is sending me stuff forward, and it's really appreciated. Last opportunity for you listeners or audience, do shoot your last questions now because we're going to wind down. I will have one last sort of question that I have here, which really is a technical one. When you look at your asset allocation at Saltagen and your investment thesis, how do you deal with the geopolitical side? Is that a specific filter you add on top of it, or how is it done?
That's a good question, because the reality is that we also when you talk or when you interact with a lot of venture capital funds, is that you have to be in the weeds because you have to be domain specialists in those technologies, in those operations, in those regions to capture not just only those deals, but to realize those deals post-investment. So there's a granularity that's also very important when you actually understand. That's why, there's very hyper-specific Silicon Valley, literally neighborhood by neighborhood VC funds. And just like that, there's Hangzhou VC funds, there's Greater Bay Area VC funds is different. But then the reality, as I brought up earlier, and that the word the rupture is that geopolitical risk, geopolitical overlay, it's bleeding into everything, and you cannot avoid that. So, especially when you're talking about life sciences, ag, infrastructure, energy, resources, and mining, these are all regulated or within the logistics, and also capital flow into those domains are also highly regulated as well too. So the thing is that not many traditional VC firms actually would have that overlay, but that's something that our investors, our LPs benefit, is that they understand that we have direct access to the market leaders, decision makers, regulatory backers, and for us to directly influence the policy or to be able to be at the forefront so that our portfolio companies can benefit from them. And we felt that there's actually it comes to a head over the last 2 years, especially within the life sciences field. We brought up acoustics, we brought up XK. There was, we talked about the positives. There were negatives during this whole time. They were held back because their technical reviewers in US FDA, they got fired. And then the new one got fired. And then the third one got fired. And then everything got held back.
Yes.
And in life sciences is that, every time you pass a clinical stage, there's comparables. You understand how far they get, and they're burning in terms of negative cash flow.
Yep.
So being able to help them navigate, to get them into a market that has an understanding of a friendly environment, regulation, and also investors is actually very critical. And that's something that we've benefited and we helped our LPs extract value and also hedge against this type of geopolitical risk effectively. I think that's the future of VC investment, because technology right now is getting more and more intertwined with politics.
Yes.
And that's a reality. And we cannot, kind of put our heads in the sand, as I mentioned earlier. We have to know both 10,000 feet up and straight into the weeds.
Yes.
You have to make those choices. And you can't just say that, someone who does it and be a club investor.
Yes.
That day and age has gone.
We also have a number of tools that are very practical in sort of de-risking our geopolitical exposure. Let me give a very one deal that we're looking to deploy into right now. It's a Swiss company based in Switzerland.
Yep.
They did their clinical trials in the US, right? The USC is doing the anchor. And then on the other side, they're doing their preclinicals and all the animal models and everything. They did that all in China.
Yes.
And because it's faster, better, cheaper in China.
Sure.
And their structure is a Cayman structure holding a Swiss, holding then the Hong Kong, and then holding the China, with that the Swiss holding the US. So there are different layers to which we are structuring companies such that these geopolitical questions and also the regulatory questions are answered from the get-go.
Yep.
From day one, we are already aware and mindful of these issues that can come up, and what are the tools and how do we position ourselves to prevent any complications moving forward. And at the very, very early stage, there's a professor who recently we're planning to start a company with. And he has 2 other professors in his team as well, 2 Hong Kong passport holders, 1 Australian passport holder. And we say, let's only register the Australian passport holder. so that, if anything goes wrong, we all know it's ultimate beneficiary as Australian. Right. So there are things that we do have to be practical about, this is the reality that we live in now. But again, we are uniquely in a position where we're very mindful, very aware, but this is what Hong Kong has been doing for the past 100 years. Through wars, through everything, objectively worse times than now, Hong Kong has still thrived. Sure. And so I remain optimistic. Yeah.
Very, very good. Thank you so much. I see time is running. Before I close, I would like to thank all my colleagues in the background that put in very hard work to make these seminars smooth and successful. So thank you. You know who we are. Joseph, Emmanuel, you've been fantastic. Your team of Saltagen Ventures, thanks a lot for sharing not only the insights, but also helping with the organization of the call. It's extremely appreciated. And then we have on the slide already our next quarterly outlook in exactly 3 weeks' time, Thursday, 25th of June, 10:30 a.m. in Europe, 4:30 p.m. in Asia. Adrian Kirigin, our Chief Investment Officer, will take the lead there. And we have Blackstone that would, maybe we can have the slide quickly on. Yes, here we go. So we have Adrian Kirigin, who will present the macro outlook, our asset class preference on one side, and then we have Blackstone coming in. Blackstone, who will elaborate about private markets. We're seeing, pressure in private debt. We're seeing some pressure in the private equity space, and I think this is something we want to deep dive and understand better. Dear audience, from me and my colleagues of Probus Pleion, thank you for your partnership and trust. We greatly appreciate your presence today. Probus Pleion Group, large enough to matter, small enough to care. Goodbye.